William Henry Pratt was already an established stock player in Hollywood by the time he had his most famous breakout role. Frankenstein was his 82nd film, but his role as the monster was so shocking and iconic that he became a byword for horror. Karloff. Karloff the Uncanny finally hit much-deserved stardom through the 1930s, headlining movies like The Mummy, The Old Dark House, The Mask of Fu Manchu, The Ghoul, The Black Cat, Bride of Frankenstein, The Raven, The Black Room, The Walking Dead, The Man Who Lived Again, and The Invisible Ray, among many. But the collapse of Universal Studios and the implementation of the Hays Code in the late 1930s brought a change of fortune for horror movies and for Karloff's career in them. Universal's new ownership tried with Son of Frankenstein in 1939. It was one of their most expensive films that year, but had its share of crippling flaws. The plot did not follow on the too daring footsteps of Frankenstein and Bride of Frankenstein. Instead of following the trajectory of the original novel and growing the monster's vocabulary, Karloff the Uncanny was reduced to a mere prop around whom Bela Lugosi's Igor danced circles. After Son of Frankenstein, the Universal monsters were reduced to B-movie status, and Karloff along with them. As the king of horror, Karloff would quickly find himself as the king of B-movies, not only at Universal, but also in the myriad other contracts he was balancing. At Monogram Pictures, he starred in Yellowface as Mr. Wong. He starred in a series of Mad Doctor films at Columbia, including The Man They Could Not Hang, The Man with 9 Lives, Before I Hang, The Devil Commands, and The Boogeyman Will Get You. He was conscripted for Universal's Technicolor conceptual follow-up to 1943's Phantom of the Opera, which failed at the box office, and then got to play the mad scientist in House of Frankenstein, passing the torch to Glenn Strange as the monster. But this was also the end of the road for Karloff with this sort of thing. Facing a bleak future at Universal, Karloff jumped when Val Lewton came calling. Lewton had already been making a name for himself at RKO with a new type of B-movie horror. Low-budget films of indelible style that eschewed the ghoulies of Universal for fixation on modern neuroses. Cat People, I Walked with a Zombie, The Leopard Man, The Seventh Victim, The Ghost Ship, and The Curse of the Cat People, each exploring the tenuous grasp we hold on sanity in the shadows of the modern age, amidst old atavisms and wholly new opportunities for depravity. Karloff signed a 3-picture deal with RKO in 1945, though by no means his first picture with the company. That would be The Lost Patrol in 1934, a World War I picture. In 1940, he played as the redoubtable and stern judge in RKO's horror spoof You'll Find Out, starring big band leader Kay Kaiser alongside Bela Lugosi and Peter Lorre. The first of his new contract was a moderate departure for him and a very drastic one for Lewton. Instead of a modern film about modern neuroses, he filmed perhaps his most Universal-esque horror movie, a period drama adapting Robert Louis Stevenson's The Body Snatcher. In it, Karloff plays cabman John Gray, a carriage driver and grave robber who supplies corpses for the Medical School of Edinburgh in the year of our Lord 1831. In this time, laws prevented any legal means of procuring medical corpses for study, and as always the case when law prevents something, it creates an opportunity for businesses run under the mortuary table. Notoriously, this led to the infamous real-world Burke and Hare murders of 1828, when William Burke and William Hare took a more direct approach to supplying fresh cadavers for the anatomy lectures of Dr. Robert Knox at Edinburgh's Royal College of Surgeons. We discover, in the world of The Body Snatcher, that the current school administrator, Dr. Wolfe McFarlane, was a student assistant to Dr. Knox, and Gray an assistant to Burke and Hare. During the court proceedings, Gray covered for McFarlane, taking the punishment that should have been his, and never letting him forget it. We rejoin their story when McFarlane has a student assistant of his own, who is being ushered into such dark dealings with the so-called resurrection men, when a string of incidents in the dark kirkyards of Edinburgh leads Cabman Gray to follow in the footsteps of his mentors. Karloff's performance as Gray is odious and magnetic. He is a low-class man with a silken tongue. Even the most cultured among us today lack his eloquence. But it is not his estate or his occupation that makes him odious. It is the power he revels in wielding. When McFarlane tries to buy him off and send him on his way, Gray admits that there would be no fun in it, because the joy of the thing is that he gets to hold it over McFarlane. Here is a man of means and position who, nevertheless, is under the thumb of the lowly grave robber. With but a word, he could bring all of McFarlane's accomplishments crashing down. So Gray enjoys taking liberties with him, imposing himself upon his old friend Toddy, and stabbing at him, not with knives, but with verbal indignities. McFarlane knows all this too, and it eats away at him. His imperiousness is a cover for the mercy of his life at the hands of his secrets. But as Gray points out to him in one of their rhetorical sparring matches, he also lacks a good bedside manner, because he learned anatomy from corpses, but not healing. He only sees bodies as assemblies of parts, and lacks the feeling to heal a person. The villainy of Gray is only possible because of the subtler and greater villainy of the more respectable man. The Body Snatcher also marks the last time that Karloff would share the screen with that other great horror legend, Bela Lugosi's. Lugosi's career was not as charmed or as steady as Karloff's. Though charismatic, with a presence that practically leaps off the screen, and an accomplished actor in his home country, Lugosi's heavy accent, his own attitude, and personal problems kept him from the stardom that he richly deserved. Lugosi languished in Poverty Row, while the more versatile Karloff had a steady career. In The Body Snatcher, Lugosi has a bit part as McFarlane's manservant who meets a violent end at Gray's hands. Karloff's second film for RKO was much closer in tone to Lewton's previous films. In Isle of the Dead, he plays a general in the Greek army in 1912, a hard man nicknamed the Watchdog, who rules with absolute and uncompromising military precision. A reporter has joined their unit and remarks at what a cold and unfeeling man Karloff's general must be. On the contrary, the general replies, his late wife would not have known him like that, and offers to take the reporter along to visit a nearby island graveyard. When they arrive, they find the graves despoiled and singing going on in a nearby house, on what was supposed to be a deserted island. Determined to find out who despoiled the graves, the general and reporter intrude upon the house. There they find a Swiss archaeologist who has taken up residence and blames himself for the grave robbing. 15 years ago, he offered money for archaeological finds, leading to every poor villager across the water to rip open every grave. Also in the house are a Greek housemaid, an English tinsmith, played by Skelton Knaggs, and a British diplomat, his cataleptic wife, and their Greek lady-in-waiting, Thea. Staying the night, the party wakes up to the discovery of septicemic plague among them. They call the military doctor over, and sure enough, the only solution is to quarantine the island. Nobody comes, and nobody leaves. How did the plague reach the island? Well, the Greek housemaid has an idea. The plague is a curse from the gods for them harboring a Vorovalka, a kind of psychic vampire of Greek superstition. And who is the Vorovalka? Why, none other than the healthy, winsome, and beautiful Thea. Look at how sickly and pale her mistress is. And it doesn't help that Thea is openly bitter towards the general, for she remembers how he used artillery on entire villages that refused to pay their taxes. Of course, Karloff's general refuses to believe such nonsense from the housemaid and claims to be unbothered by Thea's defiance. But as more and more people die, isolation preys more and more heavily upon their minds, and military order breaks further and further down. These intrusive thoughts begin to worm their way into his mind. And in typical Lewtonian fashion, we are left with the question, is she or isn't she? A question that she isn't even sure she knows the answer to. The last film in Karloff and Lewton's collaboration was more of an historical drama than a horror movie. Karloff plays Master George Sims, the chief apothecary of the Asylum of St. Mary's of Bethlehem, a place known by that name that inspires dread and has become synonymous with rampant, unchecked insanity, as well as serving as the film's title, Bedlam. Karloff's Sims is another sniveling but silver-tongued manipulator of the wealthy and powerful. His insane asylum serves as a useful pit in which to throw the politically inconvenient, and that, in turn, grants a certain power to Sims as the keeper of secrets. Now, the cruelty and barbarism of Bedlam draws the ire of his benefactor's protege, the Lady Nell Bowen. At the provocation of a Quaker stonemason, her performatively haughty demeanor is softened to compassion for the poor souls kept imprisoned without comfort or real care. This eventually leads to her own incarceration in that dreaded place, as an uppity woman. Bedlam is, in many ways, the apotheosis of Lewton's themes on neuroses. We take an unflinching look at the horror of those whose minds have been lost within madness. And yet, we see that they are not horrors in themselves. The Lady Bowen is like a missionary amidst such horror, a mothering and saintly figure who works as best she can within those walls to ease the suffering of her fellow inmates. She has her doubts, though. Not that she is mad, but that she is being driven mad by being there. The real horror of Bedlam is how the asylum is used as a weapon, how neurosis is weaponized by the corrupt. The horror is not in the dim, black cells of Bedlam, but in the gilded drawing rooms of Sims and his master and their frivolous guests. The real horror is not neuroses, but rather, the real horror is power. Unfortunately, this would be the second last of Karloff's films for RKO, followed by Dick Tracy Meets Gruesome, and the last of Val Lewton's. Karloff stayed steadily employed, as he had always done. In fact, he felt liberty to turn down a role at Universal in Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein. Though Lon Chaney Jr. reprised his role as the Wolfman, and they dusted off Bela Lugosi for only his second round as the one and only official Dracula, Karloff was unsure that he wanted to don the demanding makeup of the monster, nor that the film meant anything but to spit upon their horror legacy. It turned out that the film was a loving tribute to them, which ushered Dracula, the Wolfman, and Frankenstein monster onto immortality in their final, petrified and iconic forms. Playing catch-up, Karloff would star with Abbott and Costello in 2 follow-up films, Meet the Killer Boris Karloff and Meet Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. His film career wound down in the 1950s as he spent more time with television and marketing his horror persona. His last homes were American International Pictures, a 4-picture deal with Mexican film producer Luis Enrique Vergara, and narrating both How the Grinch Stole Christmas and Mad Monster Party. Karloff the Uncanny passed to the great beyond in 1969. Val Lewton would not fare so well. His patron was RKO head Charles Corner, the man who was left to pick up the pieces after the company's fiasco with Orson Welles. It was Corner who coined the motto, showmanship instead of genius. It was also Corner who hired Lewton and handed him the horror B-movie unit. But in 1946, Corner felt a strange tingle in his foot, and a swelling of the glands in his neck. He was diagnosed with leukemia, and on February 2nd, passed away. With the tragic loss of his patron, Lewton was not far behind. Turmoil at the studio, the end of World War II, the lingering stress of the lawsuit over Ghost Ship, and illness from a minor heart attack led to Lewton's release from the company and further deteriorating health. By 1948, RKO was sold to Howard Hughes, and by 1951, Val Lewton was dead of a major heart attack. But while 1946 saw the last of the stunning series of horror films by Val Lewton, it was also the year in which RKO released perhaps the greatest Christmas movie of all time. In our next installment, just in time for Christmas, we'll be taking a look at It's a Wonderful Life.